Everyone. So in this video, I'm going to be going over the shifters for our short-run aggregate supply and then talking about our long-run aggregate supply as well. You should realize that in this model, the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, aggregate demand shifts probably 80% of the time. Aggregate supply shifts maybe 20% of the time. It's just aggregate supply does not shift as much as aggregate demand. So if you're ever not sure which one to shift, odds are that it's aggregate demand, not aggregate supply. But we do have some shifters of our aggregate supply curve. Basically, anything that affects production is going to affect our aggregate supply curve. So if we think back to like the PPC, our first model of production, right, where it's trade, technology, resources, those are really going to be your shifters. Now, instead of trade with aggregate supply, I want you to more think about it like government's involvement or like government regulation of trade. That the more free market that the government makes things, that would increase short-run aggregate supply, or the more constraints on the free market, that would decrease short-run aggregate supply. Now, that doesn't mean that we should always have unlimited free markets. I mean, I think, in Unit 3, one of the things we went over was some of the failures of the free market and how we need government involvement to kind of correct those problems with the economy. But if we overdo it, that would limit our ability to produce in the short run. The reason why those are short-run shifters is because you could always change those rules, change those laws, and then the curve would shift the other way. So if we put more restrictions on businesses, that's going to decrease our short-run aggregate supply to the left. But then we could take away those restrictions, and it would increase our short-run aggregate supply back to the right. Most commonly, our short-run aggregate supply shifters are going to be resources and technology. Just like they were for the PPC. Same thing for short-run aggregate supply. The question that we're always going to have to ask is like, is this a temporary thing? Is this like a, kind of a smaller thing, or is this like a permanent big thing? Because if it's a permanent big thing, then it's probably going to shift our long-run curve. It's very rare that in like an Econ 101 class, you're going to get a question where you're shifting your long-run aggregate supply. It would have to be like a big permanent change to technology or resources, something like the invention of the steam engine or the invention of the internet. Those things would radically increase our productivity, and that would be ongoing. So if it's like a permanent increase, then our long run curve would increase to the right. If it's something that's more temporary, like for instance, like say the price of oil has gone down, well, oil is a really key input resource that's used in the production of lots of things. So if the price of oil has gone down, that's going to increase our short-run aggregate supply curve to the right. But then that price might just go back up, causing it to shift back to the left. So because that's like a temporary condition and not something that's like a permanent change, that's going to shift our short-run curve, right? So like the price of oil, that's going to be a good short-run shifter. The price of electricity, good short-run shifter, right? The invention of solar panels, that's a long-run shifter because it leads to a permanent increase in our ability to produce energy. So that's going to be the big difference between a short-run shifter and a long-run shifter, right? So we're looking here at our short-run aggregate supply curve. Our shifters are going to be trade, right? But really in the form of like government involvement in the economy, resources, technology. So for instance, let's say that we wanted to kind of model what happened this past March when we had a kind of, government mandated stay at home because of COVID. Well, when we have that government mandated stay at home, then that's going to cause our short run aggregate supply curve to decrease to the left, as you see here. Now, why is that the short run curve shifting? Because if we wanted to, the next day, we could get rid of those stay-at-home mandates and we could all be back out there producing, and we would be back to our full employment level of production. So like that government action or that government mandate decreases production in the short run, but in the long run, our ability to produce isn't really changed, right? So an example of that would be something that would be more like, would be our, invention of like, the personal computer, right? Allows us to do a whole lot more you know, a whole lot more efficiently, allows us to produce a whole lot. So if I wanted to show that, I would do this. I would have my long run aggregate supply curve, and then that would be increasing to the right, creating a new full employment, a new level of full employment. So what you're seeing here is when the short run curve shifts, right, a temporary change to production, that's kind of like the point on our PPC moving, right? But when the long run curve shifts, that's like our whole PPC, that's the line of the PPC moving out or moving in. So there's this real strong connection between PPC and the aggregate supply graph, right? Because they're both graphs of production. So they should be showing the same effect. They just show it in different ways because they model it in slightly different ways. So it's like looking at the same incident, but from two different points of view. But when there's, you know, something that happens, they should both see the effects of that incident, which is what we get. Right? So that if it's like a temporary change in production, that's going to be the point on our PPC moving in or moving out, depending on whether it's increasing production or decreasing production. But if it's a permanent change, that's going to be the whole line moving out or the whole line moving in. All right. So that's shifting our short run and long run aggregate supply curves. Remember that when it comes to like College Board test questions, probably 80% of the time, it's going to be aggregate demand that is shifting, at least initially. In a couple of videos, I'm going to show you how short-run aggregate supply might shift in response to aggregate demand. But at least initially, 80% of the time, it's going to be aggregate demand that's going to be shifting. And then if it is aggregate supply that's shifting, very rarely is it long-run aggregate supply that's shifting. Only do that if you are positive that we have like a massive permanent long-run change to our ability to produce, the invention of something big, basically. All right, take care. I'll see you guys in the next video.